Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to the Board of Trustees meetings for the Utah Transit Authority. Today's Wednesday, July the 31st, and we welcome everyone. If you would, we'll invite you to stand and join us in repeating the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our first item up is our Safety First Minute, and I'm not sure if I see Sheldon. Looks like Lamont got the lucky duty. Thanks, Lamont.
Yes. Thank you. Sheldon couldn't be here. He's kind of stuck in Denver on a canceled flight at the moment. So I'll be starting off with a short video.
Flights.
Yeah. Can you hear me better? So we'll start off with a short video on distracted driving or being a distracted pedestrian.
Remember, it only takes a second to be safe around trains. Before you go near or cross the tracks, put away anything that might distract you. Pull out your earphones, put down your cell phone, and look both ways. A few seconds without your tunes or text message won't hurt you, but a train you don't see or hear coming just might. Besides, that song or text will still be waiting for you when you're safely away from the tracks. For more safety tips, visit rideuta.com.
So that dealt with pedestrians, and this is just some distracted driving known facts. As you know, as you can see here on the graphic, we have 31% of drivers between the ages of 18 and 64 have been reported as being distracted while they're driving, either by text messaging, answering emails, and the such. In 2010, 1 in 5 crashes involved someone who was distracted while driving. Those resulted in injuries. Each day, 9 people are killed from distracted driving incidents. So very important thing, the message to bring out to your families, your friends, your colleagues, and especially your children. I do OLI Operation Lifesaver presentations to new drivers, and these are kind of messages we send out to them, especially that age bracket. With our new drivers, we do see the potential for having an incident rise exponentially once you introduce distractions like friends or text messaging. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lamont. That's a great message. We'll look to first public comment. Bob?
Yes, we do have one comment from George Chapman on several items on today's. The first one is, I'm against spending $45 million for the Mid-Valley BRT for 2,200 passengers a day, since it may remove lanes of traffic that could handle 10,000 vehicles a day from a road that is already congested. I'm against charging fees for basic information from UTA, since it discourages public engagement. The third comment is, I'm against the equity analysis, since I believe the west side of Salt Lake City is not getting timely service that the east side gets due to zigzags, turns, and going in circles. Equity analysis should include time to go downtown. The last one is, I urge UTA to add a green bike station at the end of the S line to allow more use from Central Point. Tourists use green bike downtown, and the Parley's Trail to Bonneville Shore Trail could be a tourist destination. And Sugar House developers pay funds to bike share to lower parking requirements. Those are the only comments I had today.
Thanks, Bob. Next up is our approval of our minutes from July the 17th. Entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the board meeting minutes from July 17th, 2019, with the minor correction on page 2 to appropriately number resolution R 2019-07-02 instead of R 2017-07-02.
Second.
I have a motion and a second with indicating a correction. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next up is our agency report with our Director Steve Meyer.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Three items to talk about today. First, on the grants, we recently sought your approval for a NOLO grant to get some additional electric buses. We weren't successful in that. They just announced this past week. But St. George did receive a grant award for that, and I believe they're going to use it for a bus from St. George to Springdale. So that's exciting news for them, and I'm sure we'll be cooperating with them to pass on our knowledge so far of electric buses. University bus bays, we talked about that last meeting. Just to give you an update, the plans are 90% complete. University is currently undergoing their code review of the plans. We're working on value engineering to get the cost in line with the budget, and we anticipate that a phasing plan will be complete tomorrow and start date on the 5th of August. It's going to run a little bit longer into the school year a bit, but we'll work to minimize that impact to the university patrons around the Union Building, but we anticipate about a 4-week construction period on that.
Steve, what will the buses do when they get to end of line without the facility? Will they just continue on, or will they have a temporary place?
I'll have to check, but we know. I think, we'll probably look for a temporary location there.
Okay.
And the third item is you may have seen the news story recently about the fire in Layton, apartment fire, where we responded with some buses and to help shelter people during the heat. And I just wanted to let the board know that that's not an uncommon request for UTA to provide buses like that. There was a fire at a restaurant a year or so ago in Provo, and in the wintertime, and we provided buses for shelter. So we're often requested by emergency services to provide, outside emergency services, to provide those buses for that. And it goes beyond that, even into national events. We had some people from that were impacted by Hurricane Katrina flew in, and we provided buses to get them up to the university, or to Fort Douglas. And then we've provided vans for first responders to get out to forest fires and hurricane events around the country. So we do have an emergency response component to what we do, and I think it's an important resource that we're able to provide to the community.
Steve, is that, and I'm not expecting it, but is it reimbursable, or is it just something you do? And I guess if we get into a similar kind of situation,
Right.
others reciprocate.
I think mostly the local ones we're just contributing that. A lot of occasions we're contributing, and the entities on the other side have the opportunity. We do seek some reimbursement for that. But we'd hope they do the same for us as well.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for that report. Next item up is item 7 on our agenda, which is a financial report for June of 2019. Bob?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the dashboard for June financials, and we've already gotten our sales tax for July, so I'll be updating that just a little bit as we go along here. As we've talked about for several months, sales tax is declining. Remember, a couple of months ago I told you there were 4 months where we saw double-digit growth last year. Well, that's not going to happen this year, I think. So we expected a decline in our sales tax growth. If I extended the red line there to include this month, it would go from 3.18% to 2.77% for the 6-month comparison. I've started a dialogue with the Tax Commission to better understand what's going on and how some of the recently adopted or exemptions might have affected us. So hopefully we'll have that soon for the July presentation in a few weeks. Fair revenue is about on budget, slightly below operating expense. We had a good month. For the year, we're $7 million under budget. And then our ridership is almost exactly what it was last year, even with the disruption of the significant 27-day construction period. So if we look at sales tax collections, you remember the far right bar, the overall
Bob,
month or
can I
two.
ask you about ridership?
Sure.
And, you know, having just come back from a conference talking to other transit agencies about their trends, to actually be flatlined or somewhat is actually somewhat remarkable compared to where some are going. And I think about, too, with, you know, we benefited from UVX during the school year, but those numbers would do a post-school year kind of thing. Do we feel fairly comfortable where those numbers are? And I say that from the standpoint of, I mean, not that they have to be, but I'm like, that's great in the sense of it could be worse.
Of course, it could be worse. You know, you asked for comfortable. Of course, we'd be more comfortable if they were growing every month and we saw increased ridership. But you're right, compared to other agencies, at least my understanding, I don't see those statistics. Steve might. That, you know, we're doing okay as far as ridership.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
No problem. So the rightmost bar here is, again, the overall sales tax. You might remember a month or two ago that was 6%. After the July sales tax collections, that's going to go down to 3.2%. Again, remember last year we were seeing double-digit growth, and this year it was pretty much flat in July, maybe even a little bit down. The summertime months, we see this large variation from month to month, from year to year, and it's really hard to try to track down. Heading toward the expense side, again, we're seeing favorable variances, except for light rail. We've made some changes on how we've budgeted the capital expense, and so that's brought light rail very close to being on budget. And so I think we've got a more realistic picture there. As far as some of the variances, administration, the IT director is about $1.4 million favorable. Some of that's contracts that show up later in the year. And again, we could probably do a better job trying to spread those expenses in our month-to-month budget planning. Legal's $637,000 under the executive director's $454,000. The board itself is $200,000 under budget. And then risk management's about $700,000 under budget. As far as operations, most of that is asset management. We're about $340,000 under budget there. Paratransit, each of the operations are under budget, with maintenance being the greatest at $255,000. For the MOW, it's mainly wages and benefits, about $377,000 under budget. The light rail, it's netted out, but there's parts that are over budget, but they're under budget on some other things that generally nets that out. Commuter, I can't read today. Commuter rail, it's diesel savings, about $500,000, $550,000 actually. And then in bus, there's about $1 million of diesel savings, and the rest of it appears to be in the maintenance operations. If you look at it by line, start at the bottom. I need to reverse these. Start at the bottom, wages and benefits. Wages were under budget about $1.9 million, but overtime's over about $1.1 million. So that's obviously an area we could look at. And then fringe benefits are about $700,000 under budget. Services, the IT shows up again about $1.2 million. Planning about $500,000, some planning work that's going to be happening later in the year. And then legal fees are about $571,000 under budget. Fuel, $1.6 million, that's diesel, $200,000 gasoline, and about $100,000 CNG. The parts expense was $800,000 over budget. Warranties, almost $300,000 to the good. So those offset each other, but we're still just a little bit over on parts. Utilities pretty much netted out. Propulsion power was up. Non-propulsion power was down or over budget just a little bit. Then as far as the other category, the big ones include the insurance, which again will be showing up here soon. Contingency, we're $525,000 to the good there. Purchase transportation, $462,000, and And we're right now $170,000 under budget on travel. And that's a quick report.
Just a question on the parts inventory. Is that a result of our having to order specialized parts for older equipment and they're a little more expensive to get, or were we just catching up our inventory?
Yeah, so some of this has to do, well, let me go through the process. When we order parts and puts in inventory, it's not expense. It's only expensed when it comes
When we
out of the
use it.
inventory and is used. So I don't know the specific answer to that
Eddie-
question, but Eddie probably
Showing
does
the
know.
forward movement.
Yeah, he me from answering the question, I understand.
You always need an Eddie to save you.
So we've actually seen a little bit of an increase in just the cost of parts. And then there's some things that happen, and I'll just give one example, but we see this across, all of our business units. But like at Front Runner, if they lose a turbo, that's $44,000, just like that. And so, it's not something that you can foresee as you look out into the future. You don't expect to replace 10 or 12 turbos. The way we budget is we look at last year's expenditures, and then we assume that it's going to be relatively the same the next year. But this year, we have seen, just using Front Runner as an example, seen quite a few turbos go bad, which is very, very expensive.
Okay, thank you.
Eddie, is that turbo failure just an indication of the age of the fleet, or is that something unusual happening?
No, it's the age of the fleet. It's just the miles and hours that are on the engines. But as we're rebuilding the engines in the locomotives, they're getting all new turbos. So we should see that, go away in the future. But this happens, even on the bus side. There's parts. Anytime that you have a fleet, when one goes bad and they all have relatively the same number of miles and hours, just like cars, they all start to go bad. And so you can kind of try to plan for that the best you can, but a lot of times, an alternator for a bus, it's like $2,500. And so when those start to wear out, you start to have to replace them. It gets expensive really, really quick.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other items there, Bob?
No, that was it for today.
Okay. Thank you for that report. Appreciate it. Item 8, there's a number of items that we'll see in succession, and these are items that we've had some discussion on and presentation in a prior meeting. A couple of them, or at least one of them, also went to our local advisory council, and they had discussion and made some recommendations to us. And so it seems like we'll go through these fairly quickly. It's unless board members want to make modifications or changes or hold up, we may go through a few of these fairly quickly. So our first item up is a resolution adopting a board policy 4.1 regarding fares.
I move that we approve resolution adopting the policy 4.1 for fares.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item up is a resolution approving the Mid-Valley Connector Bus Rapid Transit Project Locally Preferred Alternative.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the resolution approving the Mid-Valley Connector Bus Rapid Transit Project locally preferred alternative that was reviewed both here and at the Advisory Council.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the locally preferred alternative. I would probably just note that this outlines the route. It doesn't indicate capital funding has been identified or the next step, but it does give some solidity to the route that we would work on, as the project moves forward. So, any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 10 is a resolution approving a second amendment to the authority's 2009 budget for capital projects.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the resolution approving a second amendment to the 2019 budget as was presented 2 weeks ago.
I'll second.
And I would also note that our advisory council looked at this also on the 17th. So, seeing no other discussion, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
The last, not the last item. The next item is a resolution approving a third amendment of the authority's 2019 budget. This is operations reallocation.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve R 2019-7-06, the resolution approving a third amendment of the authority's 2019 budget, the operations reallocation.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
The next item up is a resolution revising the authority's grandma fee schedule, and I believe the primary change here was in our fee charge for video.
Video,
requests.
right.
Correct.
I have a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the resolution revising the authority's grandma fee schedule as was presented to us 2 or 3 weeks ago.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next is an actual item that we'll discuss. This is a resolution to approve the August 2019 Change Day Title VI Equity Analysis. And Andrew Gray is before us, and this is an important topic. Andrew, why don't you walk us through the analysis?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. As you said, my name is Andrew Gray. I'm with our Civil Rights Department, and I'm a Civil Rights Compliance Officer over Title VI. And Title VI is of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as a reminder, prohibits the discrimination on the basis of color or national origin or race in any program or activity that receives federal funds or other federal financial assistance. So as UTA is a recipient of funding from the FTA has prescribed several items in a circular that we comply with. And just beyond compliance and beyond our compliance with the circular, we also are committed as an agency to providing equitable service. And a part of that is this analysis. And so every time that we have a major change, the Civil Rights Office works with planning, and we conduct an analysis to see how these impacts will affect the community and populations that are protected by Title VI. And then these analyses are presented to the board for approval and then ultimately included in our Title VI program that goes to the FTA every 3 years. And so there were, I think it may be easier to count the number of routes that were not changed than the ones that were changed. And so distinguishing between major changes versus all of the other changes is an important part. UTA has a threshold that we've set to define a major change. There are items like if we change alignment more than 25%, then we conduct an analysis. If we eliminate service, if we add a new route, those kinds of parameters. So of all of the changes that were proposed, only 16 of them exceeded that threshold and required this Title VI analysis. So we'll be looking exclusively at those changes in this analysis. And so just to give you an idea of what our parameters are for the analysis, we look at a route. This is the 601, which is a new route up in Ogden. And we look at each of the individual stops, and studies have shown that people are willing to walk a quarter mile to a bus stop in order to access that service. And so we put a quarter mile walkability radius on it, and every census block that falls within that radius is considered the impacted population. So on the 601, where we're adding this route, we have a benefit for the people in that area. And then we take the impacted populations, we look at the demographics of those census blocks, and then we compare it to our system average to see if we are disproportionately impacting certain populations. And so you can see one is colored in red and one is in blue. The red is minority populations where the population exceeds the system average are highlighted in red, and then the same parameters for blue is low income. And so we take these populations and we look at them in two different ways in this analysis. We looked at them on a route level. If we made these changes on this route, what would the impact be on this specific population? And when we looked at it through that lens, there were some potential adverse impacts that we did examine a bit closer. And then we also looked at it in a system-wide way. If we took these 16 major changes, what did it look like before the changes were imposed, and then what did it look like after? And then again, compared those and analyzed how that would look as a system based on these impacts. So when we're looking at the route level, there were two routes that kind of stood out as potential impacts. One was Route 811. As we look at the 811, it was proposed discontinuation. This is one of our last commuter routes, and it did have a high percentage of low-income riders. And so as we looked at that, there are much better options now with the UVX and other local routes that can provide better local service, and the front runner just provides much better commuter route. And in 2011, this route had about 2,000 boardings per day, whereas now, after the front runner has been brought in, it's decreased steadily over time, and we're sitting at about 200 per day now. And so just the efficacy of the route would be better allocated to another more effective route. And there are some new routes in that area. And then we have the Route 516, and this is, when you look at the map, the dotted line is the old route, and then we do have some mitigating routes that have come in place. So and I'm sorry for how small that is. So we have better frequency in some areas on the lower areas there, and then on the northern areas, we just have a more direct route. A lot of these west side routes are pretty meandering, and so the goal of this change day was to make things more efficient and more frequent service. And so when we factor in those, there are populations that still will not have a stop right next to their door. But when you factor in the more frequent service and then the more direct route, which decreases travel times, I think that it can be a net gain for these communities ultimately. And so when we're looking at the system-wide, I apologize that this is a lot to put on a slide, but what it's looking at is our pre-August changes versus our post-August changes, and then the difference between the two. So when we're looking at the minority persons that did have access versus those that do have access now, the difference is pretty minimal, especially considering that as we're streamlining services and eliminating inefficient routes, the people that fall within the encatchment are less. So we have about 23,000 less people, but of those people, only 1.8% of them were minorities. And so ultimately, as we're making it more frequent and efficient service, we're seeing not much of a net loss for minority and ultimately low-income populations. The number is greater, but it's still well below our system average.
Andrew, can you help me understand that final percentage? When it says 27.5 versus like 33.1, does that mean the effect is that to the favorable, or is there sort of this 4% that are having sort of more disadvantaged because of the change?
So the lower number is after the changes.
Okay.
And so while there are less people that would have walk access, the percentage of those people with access is higher populations of low income, of minority and low income people.
So in that regards, they have a better circumstance.
Well, we're still losing access, so it's hard to say that they have a better circumstance, but when we're looking at the demographics of those with access, we have increased the percentage.
Okay.
Ultimately, I'd look at the difference between what was and what is, and in that regard, we're not seeing a negative impact.
Okay.
Can I ask you, do we make connections with some of these individuals, or is this just an analysis of an overlay area? And there's not really any determination in terms of, are these people actually riding the system, or are they just presumed to be in a specific category? I'm just curious if it literally is 425 people less, do we reach out to them? Do we make connections? Do we help them to navigate the system as it is changed on the proposed changes?
So we do include in our analysis a fairly comprehensive review of our public outreach. And then to your point, this isn't a presumed ridership potential. And so we do have ridership data of who actually uses these routes, but the FTA is pretty prescriptive in the processes that we follow. We can choose ridership numbers, or we can choose demographics. Our ridership data may not be as reliable, or we may not have just had very many people on these routes that we surveyed. And so on these kinds of things where we're looking specifically at large changes, we've chosen to use demographic data. It may not be a direct reflection of who's riding or who's not riding, but it is some of the best data, most reliable that we have. And then in issues like on the 811, where it's a commuter route, although it's not expressed in the slides, I did look at the ridership numbers from our onboard survey, and the low-income population was only 20% of the ridership, and our low-income system-wide is 19.5. So it's right in line with what you would expect, devoid of any discrimination. It would be about that 19.5.
Thank you.
So in conclusion, as we looked at the impacts of these 16 changes, we didn't see any major concerns, and those were resolved through mitigating routes. And overall, as we look at the system-wide impact, we didn't find any disproportionate burdens on low-income people or disparate impacts on minority populations.
Questions for Andrew?
I have one more question.
Beth, and then Ken?
I just wanted to ask you, so once we approve these changes in terms of the routes, what's the communication structure in terms of notifying people at these various stops? Because this is obviously now, we're taking this analysis and we're translating it to these individual locations. How long do we keep up signage? Can you just kind of like outline kind of what is done on that?
Yeah, I can, as much as I can. We have a public hearing officer that's in charge of our communication strategies. We will most typically put signs out. I don't know if you've taken the front runner, you always see changes coming, things like that. We'll put on the buses on impacted routes a notice letting people know that this route will be impacted. And for more information, come here. We have public meetings where we go to the community, we find something in those impacted areas, and then we invite people to come and discuss the changes, provide feedback. There have been specific instances where the public has not liked the proposed changes, and the feedback that they've given has modified the proposals that we've made. And so we try as much as we can to involve the public. There are always people that don't see the signs or don't know about the hearing. I don't know exactly what to do about that, but we do make concerted efforts to try to involve the public in these decisions.
Thanks.
Ken?
No, I don't have a question.
Steve?
And I think, to your point, Trustee Holbrook, that we did have an extensive public involvement process through the April change day with the proposals that we had. As Andrew mentioned, we did make a few changes based on public comment there. This report is a summary of the potential impact of August change day. So all that work that went into developing those routes and that has been communicated. And then if you go on our YouTube channel, you'll see a couple of videos talking about some of our new routes and directing people to our website to get more information on what those changes are and how we think those benefit. Kind of plays to George Chapman's comments earlier, we want more direct routes. And I think you saw that for August Change Day, a lot of straightening and removing some of that meander, which improves travel time and I think will ultimately increase ridership and then frequency of service and hours of service as well.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that.
Clarification. Any other questions? Seeing no other discussion, I'll entertain a motion on this resolution.
I move that we approve the resolution approving the August 2019 Change Day Title VI Equity Analysis. It has been presented.
I have a motion and a second. Other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington?
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook?
Aye.
Chair Gustinson?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and to the rest of the team for all your good work. Next item up is a resolution authorizing the establishment of an employer-paid defined contribution 401A retirement plan. Kim?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm here to just present a resolution and a plan document for the 401A defined contribution plan that the Advisory Council directed us to establish on behalf of this Board of Trustees. This plan is an option, it's an alternative option for trustees. It's an alternative for participation in our defined benefit plan. And the Advisory Council determined that because the defined benefit pension plan vesting period was 5 years, which is longer than the trustee terms, that we needed to come up with a new option for this group. And this benefit, if selected by the employee, requires that you not be enrolled in both. So you would have to choose to either be in the defined benefit plan or in this defined contribution plan. The Advisory Council did establish that the plan would have a 15.5% of salary employer contribution rate. And they made that decision after we had presented some data to them about the different comparable plans that existed in other public entities around the valley. Specifically, we saw plans that ranged from approximately 14.2% to 15.9%. We also, it's important to point out that we currently, UTA contributes 16.3% of our payroll for a defined benefit plan, pension plan. So with all that information, the 15.5% seemed reasonable from a cost perspective to the agency, and then also as a fair benefit for those who might not be able to participate in the defined benefit plan. After further After further discussion with this board, we made a determination to also extend this benefit to the executive level positions in the agency. That's to include the executive director as well as the chief level officers. And that decision was made to help us attract candidates to these positions that tend to be a little bit more at risk and subject to at-will provisions of employment. The plan document itself calls out, of course, who's able to participate, and that it's very clear that it's an alternative to the DB plan, and you can't be in both of those plans at the same time. We also will offer that to current people in those roles. Most of the chief level officers are already vested in the defined benefit plan, so really there's only one that might be eligible to make that determination.
So Kim, and this isn't too uncommon. I mean, at other public agencies I've been with, where you sort of have this short half-life
Right.
of service in an appointed role. It's, a realistic way of offering retirement to somebody who may only be part of a political term in the other circumstances, or in our term, whatever will the governor might choose. Is there, and it looks like it does have some potentially long-term savings benefit, because it also reduces the retirement liability. After the employee retires, the pension plan is no longer obligated to the, well, they're not obligated at all to the employee, right?
Right. The difference between a defined contribution is that we make that contribution as the employer, and that's it. We're done with that account versus that continued
And is it, if an
liability.
employee worked their way up and you know, were appointed as in a chief position, they could continue in their pension plan, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Then the last question I have is if, and there probably are, you know, individuals make different choices, but if they say they worked their way up, they were appointed as a chief, could they change? Meaning, could they keep whatever years of service they had in the pension plan and then have?
That wasn't the intent. The intent was that once you've earned your vested period in the defined benefit, that you wouldn't be able to participate in this particular plan. And generally speaking, the goal would be that if we're hiring somebody off of the street, that they would need to make that determination before they accepted the position on which, and so I would say that that would translate also in internal, if, say, somebody hadn't vested yet in the DB plan before they took this position, they would need to decide which one they wanted to do. If they'd already vested in the DB, it wouldn't be an option.
I mean, as we did interviews, you know, and for the executive directors, it was a challenge in that discussion.
Yes.
Really for candidates who were coming from the outside who, you know, might or might not be here for 5 years. And nobody likes to work 5 years or 4.5 years and not have a retirement.
Yes.
To go with that. So, questions for Kim? Anything else, Kim?
No?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
If there aren't any other discussion, I'll entertain a motion on the resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution authorizing establishment of an employer-paid defined contribution 401A retirement plan.
I second that motion.
Have a motion and a second. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Next item up, and I understand Matt's not feeling quite well today, but is a resolution approving the execution of an interlocal agreement with the Utah Department of Transportation for transfer of tax revenues for UTA. Bob, he mentioned that you were pitch hitting for him.
Okay, sure. I'll warm up here just a little bit. In the legislative session of 2018, there was a change to the motor vehicle registration law, and it sent the motor vehicle registrations back to the counties for their transportation needs. Well, we were getting some of those motor vehicle registrations from Salt Lake County or city. I can't remember which one it is.
Well,
Maybe-
it was from the county on behalf of the city.
Okay, from the county to take care of some work on the North Temple Bridge on the line to the airport. As a substitute, the legislation provided that UTA would get a portion of sales tax revenues instead. So we were getting about $2 million before. The current estimate is this will be about $2.5 million a year.
So there's a slight increase.
Yes.
It really goes to retire existing debt, correct?
Well, actually, the legislation wiped out that debt.
Okay.
And so now it's just an annual revenue to us.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you for pitching. It doesn't sound like Matt gave you a heads up. So thank you for filling in. I guess he had something come up and it's not feeling well. Any discussion or question on this? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on the resolution.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the resolution approving the execution of an interlocal agreement with UDOT for the transfer of tax revenues to UTA.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Bob, for taking care of that item. I see your next, which is a resolution authorizing execution of lease purchase agreements for transit vehicles.
Thank you. In the 2019 budget, we included purchase of certain revenue service vehicles, including 10 buses for Salt Lake City, with funding coming through a lease purchase. So we purchase the vehicles to get the lowest price, and then we go out and look at the lease financing to get the lowest price. We sent out that, well, I should say a couple of things first. The 12-year buses for Salt Lake City, we had estimated that'd be $5,250,000. It actually was $5,170,000, so about $80,000 lower. And then the paratransit vehicles, we'd estimated $2,880,000. We're $150,000 under that in this lease financing. So overall, about $230,000 less. We had 7 bidders for this. It's the most we've ever had, I think. And the prices ranged in the 12-year rates from 2.22% up to 3.3%. And Bank of America won all of the bids. For the 5-year rates, it went from 191 to 292. Bank of America just barely won at 191. The next lowest was 196. So it was very close. Same thing with the 12-year. It was 2.22 versus 2.29. And then on the 4-year, it was, the lowest was 191, and the next lowest was 1972. So very close on each of these. So it was very fulfilling to have 7 firms bid on this. So the winning rate for the 12-year was 2.22, for the 5-year 1.91, and the 4-year is 1.91. Because of these favorable rates, that will help in our long-term financial forecast. We'll talk about that a little bit later today in the presentation. If you have any questions about the lease agreements, Blake Wade from Gilmore Bell is here to answer those questions.
I mean, not that we have a ton of excess cash sitting around, but at the current rate in the public treasurer's fund, in some ways, as opposed to shifting all the cash off to pay, you probably make a little bit of money.
Yeah, PTIF is closer to 3%.
Yeah. Somehow when I get my next car, I should have you go out and bid the interest rate for me. That would work out better for me.
We've been very fortunate in our lease programs to have very favorable rates.
Yeah, well, that's great. Questions, however?
No, nice work.
Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on that resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution authorizing the execution of the lease purchase agreements for transit vehicles as outlined.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. I'll ask for roll call.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now into our section for contracts and disbursements and grants. First up is a contract for the Ogden Weber BRT design with Jacobs Engineering. Mary DeLoretto. Good morning, Mary.
So the first one is for a new contract to do the design for the Ogden Weber BRT project. It's a contract for $6,693,519 to complete the design, 100% design for the Ogden Weber BRT project. The completion date is December 31st, 2022, and it's for Jacobs Engineering has been selected to do that work.
Mary, one question I have on the funding. We're obviously waiting to hear on the FTA grant, but there's some local money. I mean, what's the source of the capital funds? Is it UTA funds?
We have sources for this work. We have some CMAQ grants. I don't have the exact layout, but we have CMAQ grants. We have money from Weber County, and we also have some Prop 1 funds that we're using for this work.
Okay. But the funding is in place for the design portion.
Correct.
That's correct. And then this is eligible towards the total grant should we be awarded a
For the
FTA
matching
grant.
portion.
Yeah.
Right. We have pre-award authority, so anything we spend, if we get the grant, will be applied towards the grant.
Will be applied towards our
the
match
Correct.
Towards our
for the
match.
grant.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on that? Seeing none, I'll.
Now, well, as
Please.
I read through the various pieces of this, it seemed that that 6.7 million was broken into probably 7 or 8 separate pieces, doing evaluation for different pieces of that route. Did I read that correctly, that even the 6.7 million is broken into various segments?
For segments and different types of work, and also for the different contractors. There's a number of subs also working on this.
Yeah, I thought there were a bunch of subs on there as I reviewed that. That Jacobs had the overall contract.
Correct. Yep.
And
They have the majority.
Brent Schwaneveld is the project director?
I
thought I saw that on
Matt. Is that correct, Matt? You know?
It's part of
He part of the team? I saw his name on there. Okay.
Is that a familiar name to you?
That's a familiar name, yes. He was the assistant region director in Region 3 that I represented on the Transportation Commission for years, and he just retired at the end of last year.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
And yes, he's a good guy. When I saw his name on there, I was confident that somebody's going to pay attention.
Good.
Let's see, Beth, do you want to make motion here? Or?
I would love to make this motion. Thank you so much. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the contract for the Ogden Weaver BRT design for Jacobs Engineering.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item up, Mary, as well, change order for Tiger Phase 2, Amendment 9, the green bike expansion.
Yes, this is Amendment 9 for the Tiger Phase 2 construction work. It's for $708,616, which brings the total contract value to $8,212,726. And it's for the construction of 7 new green bike share stations. One is in South Salt Lake City, and the rest are in Salt Lake City. And it will be funded entirely with grant and local match, no UTA dollars. So of the total $873,000, it comprises $680,000 from the Tiger grant, $170,000 from Salt Lake County matching funds, and another $22,000 from Green Bike for matching funds.
Any questions?
Do I understand that the total contract on this Tiger, is that the amount that we have currently allocated of the $20 million grant that we received?
So far, yes. Between this and the designer contract.
Right.
That's another.
But the 8.2 is working towards the total of the 20 million.
Correct. Yes.
And so this is just the next piece of that
Yes,
that Tiger grant that we got.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mary, I just had a question in terms of once this is, I shouldn't assume it's approved, but once it's approved and started, how long does it take to get all of this established for Green Bike? Does Granite manage all of this? And do you know the timelines that they do this in?
Granite will manage the construction of the project, and ordering the equipment, and maybe Heather could tell me the schedule.
We talk about Green Bike a lot in terms of like a first and last mile. That's why I'm kind of like just
We're
curious.
going to
as
have a
how-
Green Bike presentation later
Oh,
today. It's on the
great.
agenda.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we already have the design and everything ready to go, and as soon as we
all
have
7?
this, yes,
All 7?
yes,
Okay.
yeah. And then as soon as this contract is executed, Granite will order the materials for the bike share stations. So they'll be working between August and November.
August, November.
Yeah, so we're hoping to get them installed in September, but their contract is through November.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on this change order.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the change order for Tiger Phase 2 Amendment 9 on the green bike expansion as has been described to us.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you both. Next is a revenue contract, which part of our Ed Pass or Education Pass agreement with Weber State University. Good morning, Monica.
Good morning. Yes, so Weber State, we're looking to renew our contract with them for another 3 years. So this contract will authorize up to 20,000 authorized users, and the contract total will be 1.7 million spread across 3 years.
Monica, do we, we just made some modifications to the University of Utah, and obviously they have probably a more intense level of service. Do we feel like this is comparable in line with the other Ed Pass programs that we have?
We do.
Okay.
In fact, they have been paying, this past year, they had a slight drop in ridership, and so their average fare per boarding has actually been the highest of all of our educational institutions, and so this is actually bringing them in line with all of them.
Okay. And then I guess, will the BRT, if all goes well, probably falls outside of this agreement by its completion time?
Correct. Yeah, we'll be probably negotiating the next one before the BRT comes into place, but should be well. Hopefully it'll be well under construction.
Yeah.
And that was sort of our intent with the 3 years, is to sit back down as that starts to come online and discuss.
Figure out how that's
Kind of manage all of that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll entertain a motion on this contract then.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the, wow, that was well timed.
Well, thank you.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the educational pass agreement with Weber State University and UTA as presented.
Second?
I have a motion and a second on this revenue contract. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay,
Monica.
thank you.
Next item up, we get our favorite guy, Bob Biles, back. And this is in regards to a disbursement for light rail inventory parts through Siemens.
Thank you. As you know, the policy of the board is certain disbursements over 200,000 come before the board. This is one of those disbursements. It's for Siemens Mobility. It's for light rail parts inventory. We've seen this one, it seems like almost every month that's exceeded that. And so these are a series of invoices that range from $55 all the way to $160,000 just for parts that we need at the light rail inventory. So we're asking approval of this disbursement so we can make Siemens happy and send them a check.
And Bob, one question I have, and this is just as we go forward, is there, we sort of know, and as we go through the discussion, what's going to be part of the inventory thing. And it's not that I mind having this come back, but does it slow down your accounts payable considerably? And is there some parameters that we could devise that would handle sort of these rudimentary Siemens payments? Because you're going to just have...
Yeah, so you've given us authorizations for certain types of vendors. For instance, deductions from employees' paychecks. We're going to pay the IRS. We're going to send money to their retirement funds. We're going to do that. You wouldn't say no to these. And one of the things we're trying to do is set up a association with other agencies. And under that contract, if we can get that contract in place, it may reduce these coming forward to the board.
All right.
Okay.
That sounds good. All right. Any other questions on this? If there are none, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the disbursement for light rail parts to Siemens.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Our last item, well, it's not our last item.
Nope.
Our sort of maybe item before break is an update on a grant of Steve.
Thank you, Chair. This is a grant application notification to the board, and this is a Department of Transportation, Federal Transit Administration, fiscal year 2019 Integrated Mobility Innovation Demonstration Program. and a mobility on demand sandbox demonstration. Sounds like fun, doesn't it?
Sounds like a sandbox, yeah.
It sounds like an automated vehicle. So our Innovative Mobility Solutions Group is proposing the phase 2 of our trials with the autonomous vehicle. So this would advance the lessons that we've learned so far in our phase 1 with the objectives of fully integrating into a UTA transit network. So we'd select a pilot for a 12-month shuttle deployment and work within our systems to get it as a operational part of our system, and so to then deploy it, operate it, and test in a no operator host shuttle situation, and then do project evaluation and community engagement. So this is a continuation of our partnership that we've had. This is a $628,465 grant. The grant funds is $502,465 with local match of $126,000 coming from $21,000 would come from UTA out of the IMS budget in 2020. $20,000 would come from UDOT and $20,000 from Salt Lake City Transportation, with $65,000 in in-kind services coming from Easy Mile, the provider of the autonomous vehicle. So this one's due on August 6th, and FTA's been trying to speed up their process, so I'd hope we'd know before the end of the year on this one.
Questions for Steve on this? Or any concerns? All right, thank you, Steve, for that update. I'm just debating. Should we move forward, or do you want to recess? All right, let's do that. Okay. Well, we'll move forward then with our discussion items. This is information and board discussion in regards to the transit financial plan and 2020 budget assumptions. And Bob, it looks like you're leading off on this, but I know that a lot of hard work's gone in by yours and the rest of the executives teams to try to get to this point.
Yes, thank you for that. The couple of things to talk about before we really get started here. One is a lot of people have input into this, and I certainly want to thank the budget team, fellow executives, others in their organizations who work hard on this to update this transit financial plan. And then the second thing is we're going to touch upon several points of the board financial policy on financial management. Specifically, we'll talk about reserves, we'll talk about long-term financial planning, as well as capital. So this is one of those things that's in response to your policies. So these are just the numbers of what the new plan looks like. As I go through the presentation, I'll be comparing these numbers to the numbers you saw a couple of weeks ago in the January TFP. A couple of things to notice here in 2022, the next to last line, the retired debt early, $98 million, that's in there. And then the cash from 2021 to 2022 declines accordingly, mainly because of that $98 million. So again, I'll go over these in more detail as we go forward. Another thing to talk about is our reserves, and I'd like you to notice that these are the new reserve categories. We've changed the TFP to have the new reserves, revised all of those calculations, and so that's in here. The next thing to look at is the next to last line, which is the unrestricted line, and that number always needs to be positive. That means that we are meeting your reserve requirements. And notice that in 2021, that is the most difficult year. We've known that for some time, that this time period was going to be the most difficult as we responded to the Great Recession with decisions that were made in 2009, 2010.
And again, what sort of flames that year up? Is it just certain financing obligations that hit that year, or just sort of maintenance that was delayed? And
as far as the Great Recession,
yeah.
So there were several things that happened, and others were here, I just know from what I've been able to learn, there were really three different plans made. One was to do minimal service reductions. Excuse me. So I think there was about a 6% reduction in bus service at that time, but we knew that commuter rail and light rail was going to be coming on, and so miles and hours of service actually increased through that time period. A second was challenging the finance team to come up with innovative financing to lower the cost of borrowing. And so, for instance, the group in place at the time did overnight variable rate financing on about $270 million worth of bonds, and that saved somewhere around $60 million in financing cost.
I know we did it at the airport.
Right.
Saved, tens of millions of dollars.
Right. And then the third was looking at the construction side, and I think Steve was over that at the time, and moving forward with the construction, and we saved about $300 million on the construction because it was a period where businesses needed work and we were able to provide work, and so it had the benefit to us, but also had a benefit to the Salt Lake in keeping the economy on a more even keel. And there may have been other things, but those are the three main ones that I know about from the agency's reaction to the Great Recession.
Okay.
So we'll take a look at just the change in operating revenue. It's going up slightly in 2021 through 2024, and we'll look at the reasons for that on the very next slide. So this is the format you're going to see as we go through the presentation. You'll see the January TFP numbers, then you'll see the July TFP numbers, and then you'll see an explanation of the various changes with some totals of those various changes. So starting with operating revenues, sales tax, we talked about it 2 weeks ago, and we talked about it again today. Our sales tax collections for this year don't seem like they're going to hit that 5%, so we've changed this. We've only changed 2019, but that ripples forward in your transit financial plan as your base year. We need to recognize Utah County fourth quarter money coming in, and later on you'll see how that gets used. That's not really available for operations. We've looked at our estimate on federal preventative maintenance allocation dollars. We've got a group who pays attention to the changes in the laws, and they're estimating we'll see a little bit of increase there. On the passenger revenue side, again, I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago. We've taken the 2020 TFP assumption that there'd be a rate increase in 2020 and just moved it out to 2021, and then looked at some of the other things that are going on. The forecast increases in the investment. We see rates going down. Everything I see from groups that send me weekly updates are projecting rates are going to go down. So we've lowered our projection of the interest rate. And then Salt Lake City, this is just a true up in the first 2 years to the actual service that we're providing. The TFP assumed one number. Now we have actual numbers. And then the other, this year we've had some properties that have sold that have increased the money coming in. And then we have some CMAQ revenue coming out in the later years that we're anticipating will be available. That's a quick summary of the overall operating revenues. We'll look at each one as we go forward. So we start with the sales tax. Again, we're assuming the assumption will move from 5% to 3.5%. I've started a dialogue just this morning with the Tax Commission to better understand that 3.5% and why we're seeing a decrease when the economy doesn't seem to be decreasing to me. So again, hopefully in a few weeks we'll have that answer for you. But we've kept the 5% going forward.
I might make a comment on that 5% going forward. I was in a discussion, an open house last night on the state's tax revision proposals, and they were giving some forecasts about growth in sales tax, and they used either a 3.8 or a 4% going forward rather than the 5%. Is there any reason why we seem to be a little more optimistic about the growth of 5% rather than what the legislative people are using at about 1% lower than that?
Sure. So part of what we're trying to do is we look at historical, and so Zion's Public Finance will prepare for us a 25-year average.
Mhm.
And so that 25 average for us has been in the 5.3, 5.4%.
Okay, so we're a little off of our
So we're
average.
off our
Yeah.
historical average.
Okay.
The thing that we obviously have to pay attention to is what's going to happen with any legislation that might affect sales tax
Certainly.
base.
Well, there was a lively discussion about that last night, I can tell you
Sure.
that. Went on for a couple of hours.
I thought I'd left. I see Utah County part in there, but I don't see a Salt Lake County. Is that because it was in the prior assumption and it's not really changing?
We'll get to there.
Okay,
We'll get to them.
that's great.
So Utah County, what we had in the January TFP was money coming from their third quarter to provide for O&M. Now we have the fourth quarter money coming in for O&M, payments, principal, interest on their debt, and then repaying them for monies they've already paid out of their third quarter. And that's a few slides down where we'll talk about that. Preventative maintenance, again, we've got a group that follows this very carefully and has some modeling to use to project this, and so they've just updated their projections. The passenger revenue, again, you see the big change between 2020 and 2021 with when we might expect a fare rate increase, again, in the TFP modeling. There's no promises there, but it takes about a year from the point the board starts talking about a fare increase until you can actually implement it. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. So if you did want to do one in 2021, probably early next year is when we have to start really talking about it. As far as the interest rate, again, we've moved down 0.5% on our projections. We take the Congressional Budget Office numbers, their projections, and they're due to come out with an August revision. They still have the January one out there. When we get the August revisions to those projections, we'll take a look again, but we've dropped it 0.5% just as a precautionary.
That's probably wise. I heard this morning that the Federal Reserve is planning to lower the interest rates by 25 basis points. So dropping this 50 basis points is probably wise.
Mm-hmm. So I get some information every week from a couple of different bond companies, and one of them does forward projections on interest rates, and the 10-year T-bill, they're projecting it's going to be down, I think it's 40 basis points between now and early next year. And so again, in the other, we have this year some sales of properties that have increased that. And then the later years, we're anticipating additional CMAQ money in 2023 and 2024. Don't have in here the sales tax for Salt Lake County. That was already in. And so we haven't projected a change in the Salt Lake County revenue. You'll see as we get into operating expense some changes in how we allocate those dollars between operations and capital, which we've done with some budget amendments already. Questions about the operating revenue assumptions and those changes from January? Okay, we'll head into operating expense. You'll see a decline each year here, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. There's a couple of things that are going against each other that have resulted in this. Mainly it's due to the reallocation of the Salt Lake County money. So some of the key assumptions here, in January, we had a 2.75% growth for operating expense from year to year. In this particular model, we've got 2.75% for next year, and then 3% in 2021 and 3.25 going forward after that. So if you look down in the changes for operations, that means that in the out years, there's an increase in operating costs that builds upon each other as you go from 275 to 325. And so that's more for operations as we go forward. The Salt Lake County operations, again, we had a budget amendment this year that moves that money from operations to capital. We had budgeted, or in the TFP, we'd put all the Salt Lake County money in operations, and now we've looked at how that should be allocated between operations and capital. So this is simply a switch from operations to the capital, which we'll talk about later. So because of those changes, we have a net decrease in the TFP model for just operations.
And that's the reason why the previous slide showed that slight decrease.
Correct.
Okay.
Questions about that before I head on to capital? Again, this is a broad brush on the operations expense and how we move that forward. Now, there's, I should also say that we, I guess it's on the capital side. We have some one-time stuff that we've taken into account. You'll see that later as we look at our budget targets and how we've taken into account those things that were decisions made a year or two ago. For instance, software. You get a year or two of free maintenance. Well, now it's time to start paying for maintenance. So we've did some work trying to identify those things that would affect the TFP going forward over the next 5 years. And you'll see it on the slide where we talk about budget targets. Heading to capital expense, there's a couple of big changes here. One is in state of good repair. We're providing, instead of $99 million of expense over the 5 years, we're looking at $178 million of expense. So about a $79, $80 million increase in state of good repair in this 5-year plan. The vehicles and capital stayed about the same. Vehicles about $169 million, capital about $110 million. Depot districts down, but that's mainly because we moved some expenses forward into this year because we had some grants that allowed us to go ahead and do some of that work in this year instead of in future years. Airport's about the same at $18 million. And then the Ogden Weber State BRT has now been added to the 5-year plan because we've reached that point where this project is going to happen.
Is the state of good repair portion primarily light rail vehicle overhaul? Or are there other components that make that up?
We're going to look at that the next slide.
Okay.
So this shows year by year the change in the TFP. And so the state of good repair, there's $13 million in next year, $26 million in 21. So we've increased the state of good repair each year. Some of that is IT, some of that is rail.
Well, so we're slowly, obviously, rebuilding our locomotives, so that's part of.
Correct. So there's,
Eddie looked like he had an answer.
yeah, he probably has a better idea of exactly where this is at between the two plans.
There are worse things than having the state of good repair go up, but just want to give a sense of what that would be.
So we look at that from multiple different angles when we think about state of good repair. Obviously, there's an IT component, but a big piece of it is rail replacement. So things that we've done this summer, right? So in addition to the tracks overhaul, we're replacing rail, we're replacing switches, things like that. All of that stuff is what we consider state of good repair.
Okay. Is that primarily on the light rail side, or is that also on the front runner side?
So it's on both. We look at it from both. Like on there's some things in the plan on the front runner side that would just be replacing like ballast and ties and things like that along the alignment.
Okay.
But a lot of it is the light rail piece in the, like in the downtown Salt Lake County area.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you.
So the vehicles is really just a shift between years. Eddie's group goes in and takes a fresh look at that every so often, and so they've reallocated where those dollars go to. The new capital, again, you're seeing a shift between years, between 2020 and 2021, and then out in the 2022 through 24 timeframe. Again, the dollars were about the same. You've got the Ogden Weber State BRTs now been added into the plan, and Depot District, you just see a switch again between years. Instead of the money being spent in 2021, now we're thinking it's 2019 and 2020. And same thing with airport tracks, just a switch between years. One of the things I want to make sure you're aware of is, sure, we increased state of good repair, and the capital plan went from about $450 million to $610 million. So, we added $160 million. But there were needs that we weren't able to fund. And so this just shows on the capital side that there were some requests that we weren't able to fund. The largest one is in 2024, and that was $45 million for the 56th West BRT. So it was calling for 100% UTA funding because we haven't identified other funding. When we identify that other funding, it'll show back up.
And you probably can answer, is this the piece that's required when you say BRT, but is this the express bus that's required as part of the Mountain View Corridor expansion?
That's correct.
Okay. There's a possibility down the road UDOT could be a solution to some of that.
They'd be a partner in that.
Depending on where they are in their project.
And so there is some design work. This was the construction that just didn't get funded. Then on the state of good repair side, there was a vehicle rehab for commuter rail, light rail. That was about $34 million. We had rail infrastructure about 9.3 and rail systems 4.9. And IT had about $27 million. Almost $18 million of that was for a radio system that we're looking at some other ideas on how to do that instead of doing our own system. So for each of the areas, about 82% funded of all the requests. As we move into the 2020 budget, obviously we'll take a look at this TFP and the request and continue to come up with good ideas to make more of this funded. And generally those were the ones that were, the ones I mentioned were the ones that weren't funded because they require 100% UTA dollars. And there's only so much cash. And when you're trying to make it balance, those are the areas you tend to go to. Now, as you look at the revenues, you'll notice that leasing is increased. What we did is we took some of the grants that were going to be used for vehicles and instead applied them to some capital projects or state good repair. So by leasing, that freed up dollars to do some other things. You'll notice the bonds increases from 34.7 to 69.6. There were some projects in this plan, such as traction power replacement on the light rail system. That was about $17 million that could be capitalized. The TVM replacement, our TVMs are getting older on the rail system. Those are have a long life, so that's something could also be bonded. Our share of the Ogden Weber BRT could be bonded, and then we're just a couple of other things. And so this anticipates some increased bonding. You'll notice that grants are up. That includes the BRT, Ogden BRT, $16 million. The state stayed about the same, and then local partners were up. That includes the BRT of about 11 million, Tiger of almost 7 million, and a few other items. So this is what it breaks down to by the different years and how those revenues would be coming in. Again, the bond leasing, you see changes between years that pretty much goes with the vehicle purchases and follows those. Local partners, again, a lot of that's in 2020 with the BRT, Tiger, and some other projects. And the bonding is actually split between 2 years. 2020, there'd be about $20 million, and then in 2022, about $12 million. So I also want to look at debt service, even with the additional bonding and the leases. The bonding amount over the 5 years, the total payment only increased about $2.7 million. Some of that is we looked at the interest rate that should be applied to next year's bonds. You know, if interest rates are going down, if the 10 years going down 40, 50 basis points, well, so would our interest rate on our bonds next year for that issue. So that helped, even though we're increasing the amount of bonds, it almost evened out the amount that we anticipate paying. Leases, same thing. We estimate about 80 million. This takes it up to just under 83 million. And some of that's the Salt Lake City buses, the additional buses there. Utah County, it shows up now because that's coming in to pay for debt service, and that's the amount that we would pay over 4 years for the debt service and to repay them for their third quarter money. And then the Salt Lake City vehicles, because we had the favorable rates, it's a slight decrease. It's about $100,000 a year.
Bob, if we're planning the early retirement, that's in the financial plan,
Correct.
about 98 million. But if we get to that sort of point in the bonding that's anticipated, the rate is higher than the existing debt. I assume, we'd make a judgment call at some point to use that money rather than bond. And
Sure, there's
or
a couple of
vice versa.
there's a couple of decision points with the bonding. In a couple of weeks, we'll be coming to you with bond underwriters and getting that group set up. And there may be some opportunity to do some refundings that would affect this. Well, that could affect the 2022 decision to refund bonds, because those are the bonds that may be part of the refunding. Okay, but then the other question would be, before you issue new debt, you would take a look at, what's the rate on the new debt going to be versus what can we earn on the 98 million? What's our appetite for debt versus that? You could even look at the 98 million and say, we just think there are some state good repair needs we need to take care of, and take some, none of it, all of it, whatever you want to do there. As we've said before, be cautious with the 98 million. As you can see, the TFP is fairly tight in 2021, 22, 23. That's a good opportunity to protect yourself in case the economy does swing in a way that sales tax doesn't come in at the 5% or anything else that might happen.
Right.
I think you're in a unique position with that fund. So as you look at the change in debt service, not really a lot of change. The major change is in the Utah County payments, where we've now put the fourth quarter in and how that works. The actual principal and interest is about $3.4 million a year. When you look at 2020 to 2022, that's paying back the amounts that Utah County's already paid for principal and interest and O&M costs. So that will pay them back everything they've paid out of their third quarter. Okay. And then we've already looked at the ending balances. There's changes from year to year. It's a little bit higher one year, it's a little bit lower one year, but as we looked at earlier, it still complies with the reserve policy and meets all the reserves. And those are just the numbers. So that is the TFP portion of this particular presentation. Any questions on the TFP? Any changes? Or if you want to think about it and then get back with us on changes? I know you've just seen this for the
These that will be used as we prepare the 2020 budget then.
Correct. So
Okay.
it does a couple of things. The TFP looks long-term. Do your assumptions that you're putting in for next year, the year after that, does it work financially in your long-range planning tool? Now we'll go in and look at the budget for 2020 and say, okay, so now with these assumptions, how does it work? And when we look at operating expense and capital, and we continue to look at revenues, we'll come back to the TFP after we've done the 2020 budget work and say, okay, now it's been a few months, does this TFP still work? So they're related, they're separate but related, they're interchangeable. It's interchangeable in that you change something here, you have to go over here and change it and say, does it work? For me, it's a fun part of the job.
We're glad you think
We
it's
could
fun.
get you some other hobbies.
You might want to do some more baking.
That's a great hobby to have.
I don't, nothing in there causes, jerking reaction or, they're, professional estimates of reflective areas. It'd be nice to sort of think about it for a week, but nothing in there causes me alarm, like you're way out of whack on something. I don't know if my colleagues have different.
Yeah, no, I'm not really seeing
Yeah,
anything.
hopefully you saw in there a strong intent to try to address state of good repair and come up with funding that would increase the amount of funding for that.
And I think a realistic acknowledgement of where sales tax rate is, at least in the next 12 to 24 months. And, it's volatile. Anybody who's ever dealt in budgeting sales tax knows it's either a feast or famine kind of thing. And so I think taking a practical stance and sort of hunkering down a little bit early is probably a good and prudent thing to do.
Now, these are the assumptions that you will use, you have used in preparing this. Will you test the parameters a little bit to say what happens if sales tax is 3% rather than 5%? What does that do across those 5 years?
Sure. So, kind of rule of thumb, it's 300 million coming in from sales tax approximately. So 1% drop is 3 million a year. It's about $15 million over the 5-year period. So, we would have to go in and say, where do we adjust? But you also have to look at all the other revenues. There's just so many moving parts here.
Right.
So it could be, are there other revenues that are compensating for that? Have we come up with some operational savings that help mitigate that? When we issue the bonds, are the rates lower or higher? It's just a constantly moving, the assumptions, reality, the actual
Well, I think the assumptions
replaces the
used here,
assumptions at some point.
I think these assumptions that are used here are quite reasonable. Are they going to be accurate? No, but they're reasonable given experience. So I really feel quite comfortable in these assumptions that are before us.
Okay, so now we'll switch to 2020, just thinking of 2020 by itself and how we go about establishing budget targets. So the way to think of this is we start with the 2019 budget, and then we start making adjustments. So for instance, we've had some budget amendments this year that have affected just not 2019, but expense in 2020. So that actually reduced what we would expect in 2020. We've got the Salt Lake City, this year's budget had a partial year. Well, we need to adjust for a full year next year. The Salt Lake County adjustment, where we had money in for operations, well, now that's really going to head toward capital. So we reduced that. And then there were the additional costs I talked about earlier. One of them is like a market segment study, that's $350,000. It's a one-time event. So we need to add that in. We've got some IT contracts for software that comes on maintenance. We have a few other smaller items. So those added up to almost $700,000. So you come to your new base as if these things had taken place when we did the 2019 budget. And then you apply the increase to that base and come up with a new budget target. So the overall budget target is $314 million for next year. That's overall. Well, then you look at it by how it gets applied to the different groups. Because the rate of change varies. For instance, some groups have diesel fuel, some don't. And so we do those sort of calculations to apply this. So the 2019 budget was again about $311 million. When you make all those changes and apply it to a 2020 budget target for the different groups of 314, that's how it breaks out. A $2.7 million increase, but it hits different groups different ways. And so you see the reduction in the Salt Lake County service and Salt Lake City service, but again, that's just been allocated to other places, and then you've got the increases on top of that.
But Bob, it probably warrants some clarification. You say reduction in service. It's not a reduction in existing service. It's shifting some dollars.
It's the reallocation to the other departments.
Okay.
At the time we did the 2019 budget, we weren't sure where those dollars were going to be spent. Salt Lake City was a little more sure because that was service. Well, that's just reallocating it to the bus and the
But
paratransit.
it's not an actual reduction.
It's not a reduction. It was in the 2019 budget. Now we've just put it into the categories where it's actually going to be spent.
Okay.
We still have some questions on the Salt Lake County service that hasn't exactly been decided where that gets allocated in 2020. So we're leaving that as a separate line item to be decided later is the way to think of that. And then on the far right, just give the percentage increases into the different areas. The largest being bus at 6.1 because of the service being allocated to the bus.
And why such a large amount to the administrative and non-operating?
Well, some of that is an allocation from the county and the city service. There's administrative functions that are related to that work, so that's part of the reason.
Okay. So, and that's, and again, it's semantics, but administrative, some folks would say administrative or, your top management, but you're talking a whole level of administrative to provide the service, correct? I mean, it could be managers or supervisors, or how low does that go, I guess is my question.
Well,
how do you describe that?
Excuse me. So for instance, in the Salt Lake City and County service, we're hiring some people who have to hire all the operators for the service. So that's in Kim's area. We have customer service people who are going to be put in place to help handle customer needs with the changes in services. Those are two that come to mind pretty quickly.
So operations support versus the administration. So operations support would be once those new drivers are hired or operators are hired type of thing? Is that?
No, the operators would show up in the actual mode of service.
Okay.
Operations support are those functions that are directly supporting the operations. For instance, we've got the folks who collect the money off the buses. Well, that's really operations support. We have IT people who are writing the software and helping all the groups above them on this chart, the bus, the rail, the paratransit, doing work pretty much directly for them. You've got capital development folks who do some work in those areas. So they're not direct service, which is what bus, light rail, paratransit, those are the direct service costs Then we have functions that support those direct services pretty much 100%. Then the administration includes those functions, HR functions, accounting functions, others like that, that are required but don't fall into those other categories. And some of this is based upon NTD and how we have to report it. And so we categorize it essentially the same way NTD wants it categorized.
Thanks.
So next steps from here, if there's any changes you'd like to see in the TFP, we would incorporate those. If there's any changes to the budget targets, obviously let us know. Staff's beginning work on the 2020 budget. That work will be completed in late August. We've set up some times for the board to review those budgets in September. That's an added step. Again, I think it's part of your financial policies to do that. Then if there's any changes from that, we would add those into the 2020 tentative budget, prepare that, and present it to this group in October. And from then on, there's a process to go from the tentative budget to the final budget that includes the local advisory council, public comment, and additional opportunities to make changes.
Thank you. Sounds good. I think for the sake of just giving people a quick, we're going to just take a 5-minute, and we're going to start at 10:50 on the dot, and just take a 5-minute break, and then for folks that need to use the restroom real quick. Thanks. All right, we've come back from a short break, and our next item up is our UTA Open Data Portal, and Jonathan Yip is with us, and Jonathan, you'll have to introduce who's with you.
Yes, so this is Summer Ellis. She is the GIS administrator in the asset area. So we're glad to have her, who has done most of the work in making this happen. So we really appreciate her help. Yes. Close.
Oh,
Okay,
close
sorry.
to you.
Apologize.
Yeah, I just got reminded to do so. So
Good, thanks. So we have Summer here, and then also Nicole and Laura was supporting this project in many different ways, working with some external entities to make this happen. So just wanted to show you what we have. So just to give you a little bit of a background about open data portals, these are common practice in governments. So we have down from the data.gov in the federal level down to the state level, utah.gov or Salt Lake County, UDOT, Wasatch Front, and Salt Lake City. From different levels of government, we have this kind of portals that we provide information and push for the transparency and provide the things that we do. So we also engage with some of these folks here, including the UDOT, Wasatch Front, Regional Council, and the MAC, in gathering some feedback when we were building these portals. So that was a great opportunity for the community to, all these stakeholders engage in making this happen. So the key here is basically push a lot of the data that we have into the public, and this is the first step in making that. So the goals of these is to promote transparency, accountability. We have an additional tool for us to engage with the stakeholders when we talk about service in the community, when we talk about different things that we're supporting in projects and things. This is a good tools for us to do that. And also help make informed decisions in public and private sectors and create a central data hub for public use. So we can put all of this information in one piece. And also it helps us efficiently manage some of the data requests that we have related to some of the ridership and things like that. So this would be a good tool for that. So this is kind of how it looks. So a first step in launching, so we could add more things, but right now we have 3 things here. The first is the UTA service data that basically shows where the stops and alignment and also some basic ridership informations. And then the second one is the ridership dashboard that shows basically trends and high-level ridership overview of what's going on. We'll show you in a minute. And then the third one is a web map application that shows a little bit of like a tool for us to, like a GIS visualization-based tool, so we can do more kind of slicing and dicing from that tool. So this is kind of an overview of that. So service data, ridership dashboard, and UTA web map applications. So this is the first information we have. So I'm gonna play a little video here. This is a training video we put together, one of my team members, Taylor Tollison, who put that together so that we can show you the capabilities of some of these use cases of how people could be using this tool. So let's see if this. Probably hit the wrong key here. Sorry.
So Jonathan, these instructional videos will be on the website as well?
Yes, so that we can help folks to see how they can use this tool. So thank you. that's one use cases. And we also can look at ridership trends. This is another dashboard that you're seeing right now here that shows the trend lines of our ridership in the past 2 years. So you can compare this year versus last year and the year before by mode. So you can look at light rail, streetcar, any of the mode, van, pool, paratransit, all of the modes that you have here. And it also gives an overview on the top right on the year-to-year comparison of ridership with one number to see what's going on there. And at the bottom, it shows the number of routes that is run by counties. So it would be a good starter for conversation to utilize this information. And if we need more information, we can provide in addition to these. And then the last, one more videos. And I'm hesitant to press the button. This is the map tool that we just showed that has a little bit more capability of looking at more detailed information. So, and then this is just, as I mentioned, it's just the beginning. So we can have more additional information, like we talked about route performance potentially, and more granular ridership data, customer experience metrics, and many other things. So it's provide a good platform for us to add additional things moving forward, and depending on the analytical staff and GIS staff capacity, so we can add features over time for more data sets. Thanks. So that's all I have. Thank you. More questions?
When is this going to be deployed, or has it, or?
We haven't yet. We wanted to wait for August change day data to be back in after the big change. So probably in the August-September timeframe is when we can do that.
Good, thank you.
Can I ask you, would that include anything like in the microtransit side, or is this just strictly for our existing non-pilot regular stuff?
This is just the current stuff without the microtransit.
One thing, and I don't know what thought has come to where it's placed on the website and under what categories. I was just kind of looking around, not knowing it wasn't available, just to thumb through, and to be honest, I got a little confused to where I might find it. And so I would hope that we make it fairly clear from the front page of how to find it.
So we're working with Nicole's team on.
Because especially, people are often graphical to figure out how your route goes.
So we'll have
Self-to-self.
a slider on the front page to go to our open data portal, and then the URL will be ride UTA /data. So it'll be easy to access and open, and then we'll have that on the bottom just to know ridership metrics. And I can see our staff using this as well as our stakeholders. So we'll have that right up. And mirroring UDOT and the other places, they have this on their front page as well.
And I was just going to suggest, and I don't know where that's called in other counties, but in Salt Lake County, they have a technical advisory group called Plan Tech. I don't know. I think I gave it the acronym, and everybody's hated it since. But it's a group of planners that come together and from around the county. But it'd be great to educate them as to the tool, and they meet quarterly. It's part of the regional process for the county. But I was just thinking, as they do their local land use planning and even long-term infrastructure planning, having them know sort of where we are and what kind of ridership. Laura will remember us having a conversation with one of the county mayors, and they pulled their map from the regional transportation plan, made the accusation that we only had one route in the city, but and it's not to discredit his thing. He just went to the site he thought would have that information, and I think not only do we have it here, but somehow we ought to work with our MPOs so that if most of these GIS things can be layered. If they could click on the layer, at least, even though they're not at our website, they'd be at least pulling up the right data from our source.
So as we, Jonathan and Somerset and Laura went around to get feedback on these, our MPOs are really excited about this, and this is something they've been asking for. And so we'll be partnering with them again to do those layers and also have links from one to the other, because as you build on those, you're able to use UDOT information, our information, and then WFRC or MAG. So that is kind of the overall purpose, is to really inform the people making decisions and have the accurate data, consistent data from us at UTA. So this is really exciting. Can I just take a minute to think? This was a collaborative team. Each one of us all work in different departments and different pieces, and I just want to thank Jonathan and Somerset and their bosses for allowing us to do something like this, because I think it's so important for our stakeholders, and allowing you to do engagement with mayors and planning teams for us to have this central data portal. And I just want to thank them because they just dug in and got it, and it's something that I've been excited about since I walked in. So we have one GIS person, and she did a lot. So I just want to thank them, because it was really fun to work together with everyone on this team. So just wanted to thank them for all their hard work.
Thank you.
I have a question. You mentioned, Nicole, that you're going to call this on the website, you're going to call this the Open Data Portal. Are our customers going to understand what that really is?
Well, we thought
why don't we call it something else besides
metrics or something?
Right.
Yeah.
So there are pieces of that. One thing that we looked at is consistently with all of the government agencies, that's the name they're using. So there is a brand.
So they confuse the customers as well.
Yes, but we do have.
How about if we take the lead and call it something that's descriptive, that if I'm an uninformed customer and I want to find out something, that I go there and to the UTA website, and it's a description that I can understand.
I can
It's an
look
open
at,
data
yeah.
portal.
What does that mean?
Yeah,
So
you and we may understand.
I think it's industry standard to have it as open data. If you'll look at everybody else's here, there's UTA.
That's industry standard, but we're providing information to customers who are not industry standard.
No, I think my branding team can go back with R&R, and we can think of how we can make this accessible to our customers. So
That's the only thing that I've got. Instead of calling it a title that IT professionals will understand.
Right.
Let's go out on the street and ask somebody if what they would call it.
I'll give that feedback to my team. We'll take it out and see what we can do to make it more accessible.
You could always have a subtitle that
Open Data Portal find the following whatever, something.
I had a question. If you have, when you're closer to defining the date that you're going to implement this or start it up, I think that this could be really good information you mentioned in the fall, and I know that the league has their annual meetings. I think that this is really great information that all the cities can utilize, and certainly they have a planning day as well. So if you can announce it on that day as well, either the 11th or the 12th, I'm not sure off the top of my head. But that would be really valuable because they actually have planning commissioners attend the league meetings. And this, I think, would be something that they would really like to know. And I think that, when they're talking, if they're talking TOD or in their cities, that's helpful information for developers as well, or potential, building sites. So if you could maybe define when you're going to get that started and we can kind of communicate that out, that would be great.
That would be good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, and Somerset, thanks for making Jonathan look smart. So
3 times a year. No, thank you.
we know he's smart. It's, just talking to the guy, but thank you. Our next item is a discussion about Green Bike. Well, UTA's had a long history with working with Green Bike, and we have Ben Bolte, their director, and Mary Delaretto, who works with our contractual obligations associated with Green Bike and some of the capital planning. Welcome, Ben, and I don't know, Mary, which one are you guys are leading out? But
So Ben will lead and talk about the history and the value of Green Bike, and then I just have a few slides at the end to talk about the relationship with UTA.
okay, great.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. By the end of this presentation, you're all going to be experts. So let me know if you have any questions as we're going along, but let's get started. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are created as a public-private partnership with representation from Salt Lake City, UTA, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, County Mayor's Office, UDOT, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and we've been lucky enough to have some private sector involvement, even with experts like DJ Baxter, former executive director of the RDA, and then Amanda Smith, who used to be the executive director of the Utah Department of Environmental Quality. We're actually hitting a big milestone. It's our 7th year with bikes on the ground, and so what we did is we spoke with our board, our executive committee, some members of the public, and our staff, and we said, what are the words that come to mind when you think about Green Bike? And the words that kept coming up were active, transit, reliable, community, safety, and affordable. And so even though we're going to go through a lot of big changes over the next 2 years, we want to make sure that these are the words that people continue to associate with Green Bike. So far, each bike averages about 2 rides every day. We sold more passes in 2018 than in 2017. Each station averages about 8,000 checkouts and returns a year, and less than 1% of our users have ever rated our maintenance as poor out of the thousands of people that have taken our surveys. On our annual survey, about 80% cited connections to public transit as a primary reason that they bought the pass. About 80% took fewer trips in their car in addition to their Green Bike trips, and 14% actually reduced the number of cars in their household because of Green Bike. We also donate about $10,000 in free or discounted passes to local nonprofits and community organizations. But you might want to know how this all got started. So in 2012, the CEO of the Salt Lake Chamber and the executive director of the Downtown Alliance sent a request of partnership letter. And some of the key language in that letter was, we created Green Bike to be Utah's bike share brand and to increase transit. We want UTA to partner and join our board, and that this is actually a transit program. In 2013, we signed an agreement, which is a strategic partnership agreement, and it says that UTA will be a founding member, UTA will help us grow in the future, UTA agrees to make the expansion and success of the program an organizational priority, and UTA and Green Bike will pursue funding together. In 2014, we created a strategic implementation plan to guide us through 2020, and that had Salt Lake City, UTA, UDOT, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, the county, Visit Salt Lake, and Bike Utah. And one of the key strategies from that was to expand along rail lines and focus on UTA. In 2015, we did a regionalization governance study, and it had all of the same stakeholders as before, plus the Chamber of Commerce, Ogden, Provo, and Mountain Land area governments. And one of the key findings and what the actual stakeholder committee voted on was that UTA become the Green Bike equipment owner with Green Bike as a private contractor. At the time, the leadership felt like this isn't something that UTA could do, but they wanted to continue to support the program. So at this point, I thought it would be really helpful to do some comparative analysis on what's going on in the shared micromobility space. That's just anything that goes in a bike lane. Station-based bike share, scooter, dockless bike share, anything like that. And this is from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and this report came out in May of this year. So first you can see pretty steady growth in terms of station-based bike share, and there was nothing else until 2017. And that little blue that you see on top of 2000 represents the rides from dockless bikes. Most of the scooter companies started out as dockless bike share. And it's really interesting because at that time, that represents all of 2017, about 100,000 just total bike share bikes. But the dockless was only representing about 4% of the rides. So 44,000 of those were only taking 4%. And why that's really interesting is because it kind of debunks the idea of docked versus dockless, one necessarily being better or other. It's really about the quality of the equipment, the quality of the service, reliability, infrastructure, and culture. The following year, you see a jump in the amount of dockless bikes, but that's with them doubling the amount of dockless bikes they had. There are currently no just regular dockless bikes pretty much anywhere in the country. There are some e-bike programs, but all of it's been just pushed into scooters. And so what you see is that in 2018, about 39 million rides on scooters, and that took about 85,000 scooters to make that happen. 57,000 station-based bike share bikes took about 37 million rides. So they took about 50% more products to take about 5% more rides. I can't say for sure this year, but I would anticipate there are maybe 200,000 scooters in the ground this year. And so we'll see a lot of usage go up. They found there were some differences in terms of why people ride. So connections to transit was by far and away the most reason why people actually sign up for station-based bike share. And it was about double for scooters. And the primary reason that people actually use scooters was for recreation, according to the surveys. And that was actually backed up by some slides showing the time of day that people checked out the bike and the day of the week. So they found that during the weekends was peak utilization for scooters, but during the weekdays was the peak utilization for station-based bike share. And station-based bike share also had peak times at 8 and 9 a.m., 5 to 6 p.m., the commuter hours, whereas the peak utilization for scooters was between 1 and 3 p.m. So now I'm going to tell you about all the new things that we're doing in the space. So the most important thing, what we're going to be leaning into over the next few years, is affordable housing. I was really surprised to learn with some Envision Utah data that 29% of a Utah household budget is being spent on transportation, and it's close to 40% for low-income individuals. And I feel like every other week we're seeing some article in the paper about how housing has become unaffordable. And while we can't control that, as a nonprofit, we really think we can help with lowering transportation costs. So ArtSpace is an affordable residential housing development. We currently have stations at the Rubber Company and the Bridges Project, and we'll be adding a location at the Solar Gardens later this year. And they provide housing for 35 to 70% area median income, and then we're providing free transportation to all of them. Give Communities and EcoBox are both 100% affordable housing, and we're providing free transportation to everybody that lives there. And then we're locating a station near Palmer Court, which is transitional housing, and that's all this year. For individuals that use disadvantaged services like food stamps but don't live in some of those developments, we're going to roll out our Equity Pass this September. This means that you can pay $5, get all the green bike you want for an entire year, the unbanked community can participate, no credit card or cell phone is required. Some of the new products that we're rolling out, ignore this September, this is happening the third week of August. So typically our annual user program, you get the bike for an hour at a time. Now you're going to get the bike for 12 hours at a time. No extra charge. This will be the only program in the country to offer this service. And what makes it unique is if you took a scooter or a dockless product to somewhere, maybe outside of the immediate downtown core where there aren't as many, somebody else could come and take that product. Or at the end of the day, at 7 p.m., that's when their chargers pick up the products to charge them. This way you can have security that you won't have to pay $10 or $12 for an extra Uber or Lyft ride, because inside the baskets are cable locks. So you'll be able to lock it up to something, not worry about it getting knocked over or somebody else taking it, and you have the security of being able to take that product home. In just 2 weeks, we're rolling out our e-bike program. This is Trek's first shared e-bike. It's really, really high quality, really, really safe, and incredibly reliable. We're not going to be charging anybody anymore for access, at least for the first year or so. We want to get as many people as possible trying this. There'll be about 50 of them in the next 2 weeks. As a local nonprofit, we think that partnerships really are the backbone. We have usually about 24 private organizations sponsoring stations every year. And some of the other big partnerships were obviously the Hive Pass. I hope you're aware that anytime somebody buys a Hive Pass now, they get free green bike. Dominion Energy, we just did a 5-year contract with the LDS Church that's starting this year to locate stations at North Temple, near the actual temple and office towers. They're going to be providing 3,000 green bike passes for all their employees so that they can connect to the North Temple front lines. We're partnering with Lyft again, and then we've had the most success in the last year and a half with private developers. There seems to be a lot of demand for having a permanent piece of infrastructure and to being able to control the aesthetic of your environment. In 2019, starting in September and ending in November, we're doing a 70% expansion. It's at affordable housing, workforce housing, market rate housing, track stops. We're expanding multiple existing UTA-based locations, Liberty Park, 9th and 9th, the county offices, and then more stations along the North Temple corridor. We're also adding our first station in South Salt Lake City. We've already completed our LOI with Ogden, and we hope to have our MOU and operating agreement with Ogden before the end of this year. In 2020, we'll be adding at least 4 new locations in Salt Lake City, one at the Ballpark Track Stop. This is being sponsored by a private developer that's building a series of high-density residential complexes, and then the rest of them will be at housing. Some of the benefits we see for this relationship are that in exchange for sponsoring these 3 stations every year, UTA gets free green bike passes for all staff and their significant other, and then we provide a lot of branding and messaging on those stations, our app and our website. And we try and host press conferences and include UTA information in our press releases to show that there is a focus on transit, that it's important for people to get on a bus. Every time we have a press conference, I tell people that there is nothing more effective, no Uber, no Lyft, no Lime, no Bird, no Green Bike, that's going to be more effective than moving people than a bus or light rail. Here are some examples of that at some of our stations. You see the UTA branding and thanking them for their support. All of our maps have UTA's logo. On our website, we include UTA's Lincoln logo, recognizing them. On our app, anytime somebody clicks a UTA station, it's recognized as a UTA station. And then here's some examples of the press conferences over the last few years. I maybe had too much coffee and spoke really quickly. Let me know if any of that burned by. It's 37 slides in 10 minutes.
Well done, Ben. One of the questions I have is, and it's exciting to see as you move into South Salt Lake and hopefully soon to Ogden. Does Green Bike foresee a model that allows for expansion to other major hubs or, along the system, say like in a Draper Station going to, the parks, the business parks there, or, other places where you might have a short distance but high volume use of.
It's absolutely possible, and we've met with pretty much everybody, whether it's people from Ogden, Provo, Farmington, Sandy. We're not really even able to apply for most of the capital grants, so if they're willing to apply for them, we can usually work out a way to do it. I think especially with the 12-hour model, you wouldn't need to have as many stations. You could actually just put one down, and somebody could get off of the rail stop, take it to a campus or to their job, and then still return it without having to be charged extra.
Yeah.
So I think it opens up a lot of new opportunities for us.
Yeah. Other questions, and then let's go to Mary.
I just did have a quick question in terms of, do you look at, because you mentioned, business parks and then looking for people who could maybe apply for those types of grants. Have you looked in like higher density business areas, like for instance, northern Utah County or, Draper or some of those other areas where they're not exactly where we know traffic is going, but it's not always in conjunction with a front runner stop or some other type of thing. Have you looked at stuff like that?
It's mostly on an as-asked basis. Our goal has been to get 100 of these bike share stations in just like the downtown core of Salt Lake City to start. But as interest has grown, we basically respond to those demands and see if we can make it happen anywhere. So Ogden has been the one they've secured, I think, around $650,000 in CMAQ dollars, and we're like, all right, well, let's figure out a way to do this. South Salt Lake City, so it's as needed. And unfortunately, our full-time staff, it's a very small organization. So we're just trying to make it happen as we can.
Thank you.
Okay, Mary.
Just to add to what Ben had said, there's a lot of benefits for Green Bike, and specifically transit. Some of the things UTA sees as benefits to transit is that it increases ridership by serving as that important first last mile connector. And then one thing, it also reduces the need to bring bikes onto buses and trains, and our train cars are often very full, and our buses sometimes get capacity as well. So it's nice to have not as much demand to have your bikes on the train or the bus. Reduces traffic congestion, especially within the city. And then it encourages a more active lifestyle. So has been referred to the agreement that we signed back in January of 2013. And in that agreement, UTA agreed to an initial contribution of $50,000. We also agreed to help bike share grow in the future, and then to make the expansion and success of the bike share program an organizational priority. And I think we've done that over the years. And then bike share in that agreement agreed to share data, bike share trip data with us, provide a seat on the board of directors, and Matt Sybil now is on that board of directors. And then also include a link to UTA on all their logos and websites, as Ben mentioned they do. So our continued commitment, we have done ongoing station sponsorships over the years. We provided one of our old rideshare vans for bike maintenance. We have a lot of rideshare vans. Once they've met their useful life, we try to repurpose them, and so we were able to provide one for their maintenance van. We put a number of concrete pads at several locations, including the one out front here of FLHQ. We've included, as we mentioned earlier today, in the Tiger First Last Mile program, I believe 8 stations we're putting in as part of that. And then they've also approached us about possibly leasing warehouse space over at the OK Manufacturing Building, so we're looking into the possibility of doing that. And because of what we want to do for them and what we've been doing, and that it really hasn't been formalized other than that initial agreement back in 2013, we're currently working on a new agreement spelling what we want to do going forward, so it's clear for everybody. And that's all I had.
Ben, where do you maintain your bikes today, and speak to us about this need for additional space?
Everything is currently at the impact hub. So we turned the load-in bay into our maintenance facility. It's about 700 square feet, and that's great for right now, where we have about 350, 370 total bikes, but we're going to have over 600 by the end of the year. Salt Lake City is letting us use a warehouse facility as sort of a temporary space, but we're looking into other options for just the expanded maintenance capacity.
And I know as they're looking at this one potential site, it's in South Salt Lake, but really not near your other stops, but probably has decent freeway access. But
Yes.
Does that meet your need, or are you looking?
No, that
longer
location
term broad?
absolutely would work. And, we're going to have a station at Salt Lake Central Point, which is on 21st South and 2nd West, so it'll be just a few blocks away.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Well, thanks for the presentation.
No, thank you.
Mary and Ben, and thanks for, I'm excited about some of these upcoming changes. I think they offer a lot of possibilities for folks in use of the system, so thank you. Just a reminder that our next meeting will be in a week on August 7th at 9 a.m. We're now entertain a motion for a closed session. This is to discuss collective bargaining and other employee-related personnel kind of issues, and we'll be recessing to the engineer's cabin conference room located just shortly outside of this space.
I move we move to closed session.
I have a motion and a second.
Sorry, my mic was on.
I have a motion and a second for closed session. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes, and so we'll excuse ourselves and we'll return at the completion of that session. back from our closed session, and I believe we've acted upon all the items of action on that agenda, and so I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second for adjournment. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes, and we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.